All right, so the Department of Health and Human Services released this Medicaid Provider Spending by HCPCS code dataset, which provides provider level spending data from Medicaid for fee for service, outpatient, professional claims from 2018 through 2024 across the United States. So it's a pretty rich data set. There's about 238 million rows of data here. So a lot of interesting things that we can do with it. If you're going to start working with this data, there's probably some care that needs to be taken. So I put together a blog post of how to get started, just kind of building yourself a local database using DuckDB so you can kind of meaningfully explore this data, setting up some lookup tables for providers and things like that. So I'll put that blog post in the description. So what I want to talk about today is a app I've been working on to explore some of this data in a more user-friendly, interactive environment for the state of Wisconsin. So this is what the app looks like. It's hosted on Posit Connect Cloud, and I have the link to the source code in the description and to the app. So what I would suggest first here is just go into the About tab so you can kind of get a feel of the context you're looking at before you start trying to interpret the raw numbers. And so as we talked about it, this just summarizes Wisconsin Medicaid provider spending using that HHS data set. And one of the key points is that we're focused on outpatient and professional claims here. So it doesn't include things like inpatient. So when we look at spending totals, despite the total being around $10 billion represented in this data set, that's roughly speaking, only about 10% of total Medicaid expenditure over that time period. And so we're not talking about the full picture of Medicaid here, but there's still a lot of granular information that's interesting to look at. So now if we go to the home page, this is on the start of the app just showing some broad summaries of the data set for the state of Wisconsin. And so we can see there's a little over $10 billion represented in this data set. We can look to see over time, how has this total been increasing by month? And we can see back in 2018, it was around $100 million per month. And up into 2024, it almost started to get close to doubling, or maybe 50 to 75% increase. So quite a big jump in spending in this context over that time period. And then we have this interactive map where we can kind of explore spending by geographic region in the state of Wisconsin. And so these little buckets here are going to kind of collapse more granularly as you navigate the app. So right now we can see, kind of as expected, southeast Wisconsin accounts for 6.9 billion of that 10 billion total. That's close to where Madison and Milwaukee are, so it's kind of expected that a lot of it will be down there. But if we start to zoom in or we click some of these buttons, it's going to start to separate into more granular buckets. So say we wanted to go focus on the Milwaukee area, we can keep clicking and clicking and clicking, and eventually we're going to get into some pretty granular buckets here. And as you can see, once you get closer and closer zoomed in, it's just going to sprawl out into individual providers once you get into a kind of small contained geographic region. And then we can start to click like what individual providers are spending in that area. So, and they're colored, and the size represents kind of how much it is. So this big red dot here we can see is the county of Milwaukee, and they accounted for $258 million over this time period. And we can see down here that it was only from 3 distinct HCPCS codes, and there are thousands of those. So it might be interesting to see, that's a big chunk of this total 10 billion for one single provider out of 14,000 providers, and it's only distributed across 3 different codes. Maybe we want to see what are those codes, and so we could do something like copy this NPI number. Then we can open up our global filters. And now these are filters that we can apply by time period or by individual providers or by codes, and we're going to update the whole app entirely from there. So we copied that NPI number. We want to filter by an individual provider, a type 1 provider, or an organization, which that's what this is in this case. So if we open this up, go to the NPI, paste that number in, we're now going to filter our entire app to just that NPI. So now we're just looking at this County of Milwaukee specific NPI number, and we can see now that 258 million is the total accounted for in this filtered subset. Now over time we can look at the increase in this spending from 2018 to 2024. So back in 2018, just for the County of Milwaukee, for this particular NPI, it was about $1 million a month being spent, was increasing gradually over the past 6 years. In 2024, it was closer to like $4.5 million. So it basically quadrupled over that time period, gradually over time. Now we said that there was only 3 HCPCS codes that accounted for this entire sum here. And so if we wanted to look at what those are, this filter, this HCPCS codes filter, is going to update the selections based on the providers that we have selected. So if we wanted to look at individual codes, we can see these are those 3 codes that are making up that total sum. We could start to click on some of these and see what individual codes are actually contributing the most. And so this 99199 unlisted special service, that's about $34 million of that total. Do S9484, I guess that's $0, so there's nothing actually being contributed here. So if we click H2017, psychosocial rehab services per 15 minutes, this makes up the majority of that whole 258 million. So the single code is accounting for basically all of that spend there. So that's kind of interesting to an interesting way you can use the app to kind of hone in on a specific provider and then start to filter by individual codes. Let's say we wanted to export our data. That's where this data view tab comes in, where we can click that. And now we're going to get a line item list of the specific records that are in our current filter. So right now we have 82 rows of data, and it's enriched with different lookup tables that aren't in the raw HHS data set that you'll get. So I had to attach things like NPI names and find lookup tables for all those things, but those are all attached in this enriched table. So now you can see the line item data for the County of Milwaukee by month. You'll be able to then hit this download button and see and have your own CSV file with all those rows attached to it. So here are all the rows by month for this code, number of patients, claim lines, the paid amount. And so that's the line item data, and then you can do whatever you want with that. Another approach we might take, again starting from scratch again, is not going and searching for an individual provider or individual codes, but maybe we're going to do more of a broader search. Let's just filter to individual providers who are in the city of Wausau. So now we're just going to filter to all claim records where the billing or the servicing provider was a individual type 1 provider. For providers in Wausau over this time period, there was a total of $73 million from 311 different billing providers. So those would have been the ones that actually got paid, 704 servicing providers who actually rendered the care, and 435 distinct HCPCS codes. And so we're not, so it's kind of distributed amongst a bunch of different services, and we can see on the map that most of this is focused in on the Wausau area. So then what we can do is we have kind of a bunch of different codes, a bunch of different providers. We might want to go into a provider analysis. And so that's what this next tab is for. Now we can start to analyze distributions of things across providers and kind of identify who's spending the most per claim line and things like that. And so just overall, out of that $73 million total, we can see here the top providers by total paid amount, top individual providers. And so we start to get a list of the top providers, and then we have this little bubble chart that's showing the number of claim lines versus the total amount paid. So if we want to, and that might be interesting, but we can come up here and maybe we want to change the metric we're looking at. So instead of total paid, maybe we want to look at paid per claim line. So in the color of these represent whether it's an individual provider or a organization provider. And so there's a lot of different interesting things we can do with this app. We can get down to the line item data once we have different filters in place. We could also do a similar type of analysis or different codes. So we have different code groupings, and if we want to see like what's the most expensive code being paid, maybe we want to, instead of seeing code categories, which are pretty broad, maybe we want to look at subcategories, and we can see okay, there's not these categorizations aren't accounting for the top codes, so maybe we want to get all the way down to individual codes. What's the top single HCPCS code that's accounting for payments in WASA in this context? And it's this 90837 psychiatric type code, and then we have some office visits and hospice and things like that. And then again, we can get some line item data based on what we see here, and we could also take whatever findings we have here, go back to our global filters, filter to individual codes, and kind of create the refined enriched data set we want, go back to the data view tab, and get a download export. You're only going to get up to 1,000 filtered rows downloaded. So right now our selection has 44,000 rows, and so we're not going to get that full data set downloaded. So if you want to download something, you need to kind of filter it a little bit more if you want the complete thing, but nevertheless, it's available.